All right, welcome to Path of the Jedi, the podcast where Star Wars meets personal development. My name is Ronnie Cruz, your host for this, grateful, grateful adventure. Yes, I am very, very grateful for all of you who are listening, continue to listen, and have followed us here on Path of the Jedi for allowing me a 2 week hiatus. It's been very, very nice to have some time off. I was in the Dominican Republic for 7 days, visited some family outside of that after I got back from the trip, and now I am back home on the mountain recording this fresh episode here for you. Right off the bat, some new things that you may notice on this particular episode. First of all, I am recording on my phone. So the sound quality and the frills and all the fancy schmancy stuff that I have typically on our weekly episodes isn't available right now. And I'm doing this because of a few things. Number one, I am going to be launching a new podcast, The Path of the Network Marketer, which is going to be a daily podcast. And so because of that, I am experimenting with new ways to record that free me up from the shackles of being in my room, home office, recording studio, right? And so now recording on my phone, I can do things much more mobily. I can do things much more quickly. And it's just much more freedom. It allows much more freedom for recording. The second reason, mainly, that I'm doing this for this particular episode is that after coming home from the Dominican Republic, I discovered that my computer, my laptop, no longer wanted to turn on. I think it went on a permanent vacation. I am sans computer at the moment, and therefore I don't have the same recording capabilities as I used to. I think I'm gonna find out that I don't need as much of those things as I thought I did. Again, I'll adapt and adjust as I go, and hopefully still give you guys good quality. But primarily, the content is the main goal, right? Like as long as I give you guys the same content and you guys can hear it, and the production value is good enough so that the message is delivered, then that's really primarily what matters to me. I'm not going to be able to necessarily cut and edit as well as I used to. So at least for today's episode, it's going to be very much off the cuff. It's going to be a little bit more raw, less less refined, perhaps as our normal episodes. But I want you guys to go ahead and understand and get used to that in case this is the permanent solution or the permanent way that I'm going to be recording. It's in massive transition right now, obviously. So this may or may not change in the future, but for this particular episode, I am recording on the phone outside sitting on my porch at the same time. So you actually guys might hear background noises in terms of like the birds, nature. It's a little breezy, so you might hear some wind in the background. There's actually a new farm down the road. It's a couple miles down the road, but because we live on top of the mountain, all the sound from the farm echoes up the mountain. So you might even hear some of that in this episode. So just so you know, that's why this is all happening. I am recording mobily on my phone, on my iPhone X, as a matter of fact, my iPhone 10. So it's not even a new phone. It's an old phone. But we'll see what happens, right? I'm all about being minimalist when it comes to, being fancy equipment, production value. If we can create the same or, good enough quality for you in terms of production value while still being able to deliver good content, that to me is the key, right? Then that means anybody and everybody who would like to start their own podcast or has a message to share with the world, it just means that you can do this too, right? It means you can do this too. So this is how it's going to be for now, at least for this episode. So I appreciate you guys, and again, I'm grateful to you guys for allowing me a break, and I'm grateful for you guys for allowing me to record and give you this episode from this format. Okay, so all that said and done, I want to go ahead and jump right into the meat and potatoes of today's episode. I'm picking up on what we talked about in the last Path of the Jedi episode. That episode we talked about Obi-Wan Kenobi Part 1, and if you haven't listened to it yet, you may want to go back and listen to that so that you get a little bit more context for what you're going to hear today. picking up on that topic, remember we covered and talked about how Obi-Wan is holding on to narratives, holding on to stories, holding on to meanings that happened, all the stuff that happened basically in Order 66, right? He's holding on to these traumas, and he's carrying those as a burden, right? There's obviously, as you see in this part one episode of Obi-Wan Kenobi, you see that he's carrying an incredibly heavy burden. And he's been carrying it for 10 years, right? Like 10 years has passed since Order 66, since Attack of the Clones. Oh no, I'm sorry, since Revenge of the Sith. And the message that I wanted to relay to you guys from the last Path of the Jedi was that, blank slate. Again, hashtag blank slate. I've been talking about that, and I'm going to continue to talk about that because it's incredibly important, especially from a creative standpoint. If you want to create new and different outcomes in your life, you have to be willing to let go of the old narratives. You have to be willing to let go of the old meanings, the old labels, the old definitions that you've had and that you've been carrying all your life. I've been listening to and reading books by an individual by the name of Russell Brunson. I don't know who you guys, some of my listeners may follow him. But he talks about how, we get to an age where we stop learning, right? We learn and we learn and we learn. And typically speaking, we get our degree. And then after that, we stop learning because there's this notion that we've arrived. And so we get locked into a very static way of thinking. We get locked into very static definitions, narratives of the world. We get locked into all these labels, and with each label, with each narrative, it limits our ability to create new outcomes, right? Because if you're carrying the same outcome, if you're carrying the same labels, if you're carrying the same meanings, you're operating in the world with those definitions, those labels, those meanings, those narratives, and then therefore you're going to create the same outcomes in your life over and over again. And that's what's happened with Obi-Wan, right? He's carrying this very, very heavy burden and these narratives on his shoulders, and it's up until this point that we see him, at least in part one of Obi-Wan Kenobi, we see that it's limited what he's been able to do, right? It's limited his narrative. It's limited what's been able to do. And what I love about the end of the episode is that he actually finally decides to let go of those things in order to help Leia, right? In order to help save Leia. Obviously he does so reluctantly, but now he's starting to make the shift to really let go of those past things that he's been holding on to, that's been holding him back, right? And for us, it's the same thing. If we want to progress forward, if there's some things that, again, we want to make changes in our lives, positive changes, we have to be willing to let go of some of the things that anchors us to the past, right? And that's why blank slate is so important, because when you approach the here and now in the moment with a blank slate, then that opens you up moving forward to just limitless possibilities, right? Limitless options, because you don't have anything, you don't have any anchors, you don't have any chains holding you to the past that will limit your view of what's possible in the future. Now, some other places that this actually shows up in this episode, one in particular theme is much more subtle than, examining Obi-Wan and looking at his particular journey. With following Leia, which number one, I absolutely love, right? I love seeing a side of Leia that we weren't privy to before, right? Her childhood, how she grew up, what she was like as a child, and seeing this stuff, it just makes perfect sense to who we see Leia as in Episode 4, A New Hope, right? Like, it makes so much sense already to me, even just from this first part of Obi-Wan Kenobi. We get so much information and we get so much more depth to why Leia is the way she is by the time we see her in Episode 4. The thing that the reason I bring this up, though, is because we're so used to seeing Luke, right? Everything has been about Luke. And don't get me wrong, I love Luke Skywalker. I love the character. And the fact that the Skywalker saga has revolved so much around his particular journey. I mean, it's his hero journey, right? When we refer to the hero journey in Star Wars, um, it's so it's subtle, again, subtle, but I love seeing that shift of focus away from Luke and focusing on the other half of the story, who is just as important, right? Even Bail Organa says that when he's talking to Obi-Wan. So I love that, there's almost an unconscious expectation that we're going to follow Luke. It's going to be his story because he's the Jedi, and we have again all this pre-existing narrative that we think of what Star Wars should be. Instead, we follow Leia, right? Instead, we follow her trajectory, and we get to discover and learn more about her. It's a very subtle challenge to this male dominant worldview, this male dominant paradigm. And, we can get away with it because Leia is such a beloved character, right? It's almost as if it's happening under the radar. You don't know or you don't feel that this is actually challenging your worldview, right? Well, for some people at least. I'm not saying that everybody has a male dominant worldview. But for those who do, this is really starting to happen here with Leia, and I love that, right? I love that. I think that worldview needs to be challenged. Again, if we are to move forward in the world, in our lives, and progress, we gotta let go of those narratives that are holding us back, right? That are creating just more of the same results from the past. So I love that we follow Leia. Of course, again, I love the character. Leia has been one of my favorite characters since the very, very first movie, and so I love that we're following her. But I also again love that it's challenging existing worldviews, existing narratives, right? We also see this with Alderaan society as a whole, and with Brea Organa being the head of the matriarchy in Alderaan. She's the queen of Alderaan. It's a matriarchal system, and again, I love that. I love that these definitions, our expectations, are being challenged in a very, very subtle way, and we're because we love these characters and because we love the universe of Star Wars, we accept these we start to accept these more as norms. And it started with Queen Amidala, right? Like that, like she is the OG of this, as the queen of Naboo, from the prequel trilogies. Now, some of you might be asking, why is this even important? Well, I think I've mentioned this before in past episodes, but when I was, after Celebration 2019 in Chicago, when I started listening to Star Wars podcast, actually that's what got me into Star Wars podcast. I was listening to one particular podcast, which will go unnamed, but during that podcast, they had recorded some episodes from the event itself, and they were interviewing a guest, and this guest was female. One of the questions, which really was for me very cringe, I was so he almost like, yo, I can't believe he asked that question of this female guest. But the question was, to paraphrase, the question was, do you think that Star Wars has become oversaturated with female characters, right? And he's asking this of a female guest. So that alone, to me, says that yes, our worldview, overall, generally speaking, our worldview, our male dominant worldview, our white male dominant worldview, it needs to continue to be challenged, guys. It's so important that again we open up and let go of these old antiquated narratives and these antiquated meanings of what the world should be, what Star Wars should be, in order to progress forward and make any headway moving forward as a species, really. So that's why, to me, this particular thing is important. Again, blank slate. If we can approach anything with as much as possible in a position of neutrality, then that leaves us really open to exploring possibilities moving forward. So that's why this particular theme, blank slate, I'm going to keep driving it home, is so important. And I really feel that Star Wars gets it, right? This iteration, this generation of Star Wars media and Star Wars storytelling really is trying to get that. Well, it's trying to convey that, right? It really gets moving into blank slate and recreating a world that has really limitless possibilities. I mean, if you guys have read High Republic, there's a character there, one of the main characters, who is essentially a rock, right? And that character, Geode, is literally one of my favorite characters, guys. Such a well-written character that does absolutely nothing. He's a rock, but does so much at the same time. So, like I love Star Wars for this, right? And I love this particular episode for this of Obi-Wan Kenobi, because it does challenge it challenges the way we think about and the way we see the world, right? And so I think Star Wars has always been a vehicle for that, and again, I love it for doing that. Hashtag blank slate. Riva's narrative, to me, really speaks to exactly what we've been talking about and challenging the male dominant worldview, right? We have here a very powerful inquisitor. She's third sister, right? But we see just in this one episode, right, in part one of Obi-Wan Kenobi, we see so many instances of her contemporaries holding her back, right? Wanting to silence her and to put her, quote unquote, in her place, right? Of course, with the Grand Inquisitor, because of rank, that makes a little bit of sense. But with Fifth Brother, I mean, I'm only assuming that their numbers, denote rank. So like with the fifth brother being the fifth brother and Riva being the third sister, she still gets treated the way she gets treated by the fifth brother, regardless of whatever number they fall into the hierarchy. And so we see this, again, this male dominant worldview trying to hold back and put the quote unquote, put the female in their place, right? And Riva clearly challenges that, right? And I feel like moving forward that, as we see her progress in the coming episodes, that she's going to continue to challenge that. And I love that. I love that because I think, well, number one, I love her as a character, right? And I think it's totally incredibly just atrocious how she's being treated, especially by Fifth Brother. Like, who the heck is this guy? Like, yeah, I get it, you're an inquisitor, but you're Fifth Brother, right? Fifth Brother needs to stay in his lane, man. Who is he to be telling third sister what to do? So yeah. I love Riva. I love the character. I love Moses Ingram and what she's done with it. Like there is so much just real passion and anger, right? Like she really delivers. Really delivers. I buy it 100%. Now, what Riva has come to mean in the larger picture of the fandom is a whole nother level of the conversation, right? By the time this particular episode of Path of the Jedi is released, this will have been old news. But when this part one of Obi-Wan Kenobi was premiered, there was definitely some backlash with Riva, with Moses Ingram, and just the racial threats that she got, like the hate mail and the hate messages, to me just is ludicrous in this day and age. But clearly it happens, and it doesn't just happen necessarily with those who are overtly racist or overtly sexist, right? They're like, again, this is an unconscious thing, because we live in a time where it's still a white male dominant worldview. That's just the reality, and you have to accept that about yourself. And if you're willing to challenge it, then great, absolutely fantastic. But you see in the most extreme cases where people aren't willing to let go of that worldview and aren't willing, well, I mean, I don't know, like it's scary to have your worldview challenged. And some of you even who are listening to this episode are going to feel really uncomfortable with the things that I'm saying, but that is the reality, right? Like the extreme cases when someone is so uncomfortable with their worldview being challenged equates to them acting out and sending hate messages and hate texts and hate mail to an individual who's just doing their job, performing and portraying a character, right? And so in terms of blank slate, this is, I mean, it doesn't just happen. It didn't just happen with Moses Ingram and with the character Riva, right? Pretty much with any new Star Wars story or media that gets released, there's always a level of backlash because people carry with them and hold on to an existing narrative of what they think Star Wars should be about, which is to me ludicrous because it robs you of the experience of discovering a whole new layer, a whole new story of Star Wars that these amazing creative people, these creators, these actors, these performers, these directors, these writers, these special effects people, all these people that are putting their blood, sweat, and tears into this, you're limiting your ability to experience the beauty of that, the beauty of this new thing, because you want to hold on to what your expectations are. You want to hold on to quote unquote what you think Star Wars should be. And that to me is the worst case, the worst thing that can happen with Star Wars, right? When you don't have that blank slate, when you don't come to a new experience like this without any expectations, then again you rob yourself of the experience. I've been able to enjoy everything that Star Wars has released from the prequel days moving forward. Well, because I already had an existing frame of reference with the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy I loved, the animated series I love, the new Disney era stuff I've loved, right? So blank slate, guys, blank slate. It's so important, not only to how you experience Star Wars moving forward and the level of enjoyment and enriched experience and learning and discovery that you can have, but also in life, guys, in life. It's so important. It's so important. You greatly improve and increase your ability to create new and better and more beautiful outcomes in your life if you are willing to let go of your existing narratives, if you're willing to let go of your existing stories, your labels, those things that box you in, those things that box in really your mind, right? And so Obi-Wan, he's starting to really allow himself to let go of Order 66 and everything that happened in the fall of the Jedi, the fall of the Republic. And I think moving forward in the coming episodes of Obi-Wan that we're going to be talking about, we're going to see him really come into his own as a result of letting go of the past, guys. This is super important, and this is what this episode has meant to me on so many levels. Again, on so many levels. That's why I've dedicated 2 episodes of Path of the Jedi to this particular episode of Obi-Wan Kenobi and to this particular topic. It's that big of a deal. It's that important to me to get this message across to you guys, to really approach everything with a neutral mindset. Approach everything as much as possible with a blank slate. All right. Well, that is going to do it for today's episode. It's a little longer than I had originally anticipated. I guess I had a lot to say about this topic. I mean, clearly, I'm really passionate about it because I think it's an important topic, top to bottom. Everything that we covered when it comes to challenging a male dominant worldview, when it comes to hashtag blank slate, right? Like I think it's really it's an important conversation to have, and that's really what this is, right? This is a conversation. If you were felt at all uncomfortable or challenged by any of the things that I talked about in today's episode, understand that is your worldview, your existing narrative being challenged, and that is okay. This is not about wrong or right. This is about challenging our old ways of thinking, because we have to do that. We have to be willing to challenge what we think about the world. We have to be willing to challenge what we think we know about ourselves in order to move forward, in order to progress and move forward in a healthy way. Otherwise, we're going to be locked into continuing to repeat old histories, right? Histories that don't serve us anymore. So like, just, it's okay. It's okay to have a discussion. It's okay to be challenged. And actually it's super healthy to challenge yourself. So if you have any reflections, any thoughts on anything that we talked about, good or bad, right? If you want to read me out and have an argument, that's fine too. This is all about discourse. So reach out to me, find me on Twitter. It's at POTJ podcast. Now I will admit I haven't been on Twitter in quite a while, in a couple of weeks, because I've been trying to avoid spoilers. I haven't finished Obi-Wan Kenobi yet. I'm only up to part 3, so I've been avoiding the social feeds as much as possible to not have any spoilers happen. Also, I mean, obviously I've been on vacation, but mainly to avoid the spoilers. But I'm back, and I'm willing to engage, especially for a topic like this. So hit me up on Twitter, POTJ Podcast. Same thing on Facebook, POTJ Podcast. You can also send an email to info@pathofthejedi.com with the title of this episode in the subject heading. I'm happy to read your reflections, your thoughts in our next episode if you're willing to do that. So hit us up anytime. Again, this is an open discussion. This isn't about arguing, defending who's wrong or right. That's not what I'm all about, right? I'm all about open discourse because, again, the more discourse we can have, the broader our perspectives can be, and the quicker we can let go of our old narratives, right? So that's what this is all about. Hit me up on any of those things, and we will continue the conversation. All right, now it's time for this week's shout out. This week's shout out goes to Roe v. Wade. That's right, folks. I said it. Roe versus Wade. And this is not really even a political thing, right? Like, I know, like, this is super, super controversial, but it makes perfect sense to what we've been talking about today. The fact that Roe versus Wade was overturned recently here in the U.S. is absolutely, absolutely atrocious, right? And it speaks to the fact that we live in a male dominant worldview kind of system right now. It's so antiquated and ridiculous that people's individual rights to autonomy and to have decision making for their own health is being taken away in this day and age, right? In an age where we consider ourselves modern, and we consider ourselves progressive, it's absolutely seems bonkers to me that this basic right has being taken away. So shout out goes to Roe versus Wade. I support it 100%. We are not done with the fight yet. Just because it's been overturned doesn't mean that this song is over. So guys, for those of you who are listening to this and think that this is a ridiculous shout out, you can stop listening to me right now. If you support the Supreme Court decision to overturn it, you can completely tune me out. It doesn't matter. Unsubscribe. I will not lose sleep over it. However, for those of you who are continuing to support this podcast and continue to listen to it and agree with me, please get out there and make your voices heard, right? I know there's a lot that's happening here in the U.S. right now, even outside of the U.S., who are speaking out against this ridiculousness, this backwards thinking, this regressive decision. Let's keep getting our voices out there. Let's keep challenging this stupid male dominant worldview, because this is not really the reality of the world that we live in. It never was, and it shouldn't be moving forward. So this week's shout out, guys, goes to an important issue. That's women's rights, that's human rights, the right to individual autonomy over our own bodies. So that's that, guys. This week's shout out goes to Roe versus Wade. Yeah, I went there, guys, and I do so at the risk of losing, some listeners, but that's okay. That is okay. If somebody is so challenged by the stuff that I've talked about today, then, well, if they're open enough, if they're challenged and open enough to continue listening, then that says a lot. So congratulations for those of you who will continue to listen to Path of the Jedi. I won't necessarily be as controversial, but I will not shy away from uncomfortable topics. Just understand that. And then, of course, for those that don't want to continue listening to Path of the Jedi, that's okay too. There's room for everyone, but not everybody wants to go along for the ride. So no big deal, guys. It is what it is. I happily do what I continue to do and what I will continue to do, and that is provide you guys with my perspective, provide you guys with my joy and love of Star Wars and the things that it shows me and teaches me and continues to teach me as I continue to grow and expand my perspective moving forward. So that's it for today. We will catch you next week with a brand new fresh episode covering Kenobi Part 2. So until then, everybody be well, be safe, and may the Force be with you.